There is a hidden current running beneath the surface of everyday life, a subtle, luminous stream of awareness that flickers just beyond the reach of ordinary perception. It pulses, not in the hum of machines or the noise of human conversation, but in the way light bends when it touches your skin, in the way color radiates from your being even when you are still. You are not simply a creature of biology, of bone and breath and inherited memory. You are something far stranger, far more radiant. You are not just human, you are HUE-MAN, a being of color, frequency, and angle. And this changes everything. What? If your body was never meant to be a prison, but a prism, a sacred geometry that refracts light from the infinite source into visible expression? What if the suffering, confusion, and limitation that accompany the human condition were not natural, but the side effects of forgetting what kind of being you actually are? We are taught to believe that light is something external, something that falls upon us, but in truth, light emerges through us, and its angulates, orientations, what determines whether it reveals or distorts, liberates or binds. We live in a world that has narrowed the spectrum. Schools teach you to memorize shadows. Institutions calibrate your focus on gray facts and rigid frameworks. And over time, the radiant being that once laughed in ultraviolet, that danced in infrared, that sang in golden frequencies, begins to collapse into grayscale. The child who could see colors without names becomes the adult who can't see past a paycheck or a screen. The hue fades, the man becomes human, the angle becomes flat. But some remember, or at least they feel the itch of remembrance. It may come as a fascination with color, a pull toward certain times of day, sunrise and twilight, where light bends mysteriously. It may come as sudden emotion in the presence of certain frequencies, music, art, the gaze of another soul that sees you not as a form, but as a spectrum. These are not accidents, they are echoes, reminders that beneath the identity you are assigned and the labels you carry, you are not a container, you are a channel, and the more you control the angle, the more you reclaim the original hue. This is the premise too bold for the architects of this reality to openly declare, that you were never meant to worship light from afar. You were meant to wield it. You were not made to follow the sun, you were made to align with it. To adjust your internal lens so that the divine current floods not only your perception, but your entire field of being. You are a walking spectrum encoded with the geometry of stars and the memory of light. But this knowledge was hidden, buried under centuries of linguistic distortion. Even the word human became a mask, concealing the original code. HU, referring to color, shade, tone was not chosen by accident. It was whispered through time by mystics, sages, and wanderers who knew that our essence was chromatic, that our spirit refracted itself through experience, just as white light bends into rainbow through crystal. Yet the cultural machinery stripped that meaning away, reducing the infinite to the functional, the vibrant to the manageable. To control the light angle is not about physics, it is about perception. It is about where and how you position your awareness. Because light, like truth, changes depending on the observer's position. At one angle, a truth liberates, at another, it blinds. This is why two people can live the same moment, but see entirely different worlds. The HUE-MAN understands this. They begin to shape their inner prism intentionally, not reacting to the light outside, but recalibrating the angle within. The implications are not merely poetic, they are existential. If you can control the light angle, you can alter your reality. Not metaphorically, literally. The light you bend creates the world you see. And the world you see determines the actions you take, the people you meet, the emotions you feel. If your prism is fogged, cracked, or misaligned, you act from distortion. But if your prism is clear, your angle attuned, then reality begins to respond differently. Things seem to fall into place. Color returns, time stretches, and the human awakens, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. This awakening is not about adding more information. It is about subtracting distortion, letting go of the ideas that flatten you, the beliefs that dim your spectrum, the habits that fix your gaze at the wrong angle. You were not born to live in grayscale. You were born to refract divinity through your unique lens of consciousness, to project your hue into a world that desperately needs it. So the question becomes not what is light, but what angle are you holding it at? Not am I spiritual, but what frequencies am I filtering through my prism? Not what is the truth, but which spectrum of truth is mine to reveal, because the truth is not white light. The truth is the rainbow it becomes when it passes through you. Oh, truly grasp the shift from human to human. One must first deconstruct the illusion that the body is simply a vessel of flesh, bones, and neural impulses. That is the narrative given to you by a system designed to obscure your nature, to compress the infinite wavelengths of your being into a narrow band of visible functionality. But when you see through the cracks, when you begin to question not what you are, but how you are constructed, the veil begins to thin. You start to remember you are a prism of perception, a living interface of color, frequency, and consciousness. And light, not just the light that streams from the sun, but the inner light is both your source and your sculptor. Let us begin with the word itself, human. The etymology speaks volumes when decoded symbolically. Hue implies frequency, spectrum, the richness of tone and vibration. Man is not merely gendered terminology, but shorthand for manifested form. So the hue-man is not a biological accident. It is a manifested spectrum of light in conscious form. Not light as a metaphor for goodness or awareness, but light as literal structure, because matter is at its most fundamental level. Light slowed down, photons wearing flesh, consciousness clothed in chromatics. The first core idea then is this: you are frequency before form. The body you inhabit is not primary. It is a result, a condensation. Your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs. Of these bend and angle the internal prism through which light expresses as you, and so your life becomes the shadow play of that refraction. What you perceive as external events are reflections of your internal spectrum, bouncing back at you through the world of form. The clearer the prism, the clearer the life. The more distorted the prism, the more chaos you find yourself attracting. This isn't punishment, it's physics. The hue-man lives in a constant feedback loop between perception and projection. Next, understand the importance of angle. Light doesn't behave the same way from every vantage point. A beam passing straight through glass is not the same as light arriving at an angle. Even the angle of sunlight at dawn is different from high noon. Less harsh, more golden, more sacred in its slant. Similarly, your consciousness must learn to control the angle at which light enters your awareness. Do you meet experience head-on, with brute logic and judgment? Or do you tilt, shift, allow a new entry point, one filtered through humility, curiosity, or silence? The angle determines whether the light blinds or illuminates. This leads to the third foundational insight. Perception is programmable light behavior. Your nervous system is not a passive receptor, it's an intelligent modulator. What you expect to see, you often do see, because your internal angles have been unconsciously calibrated by upbringing, trauma, societal conditioning, or inherited patterns. These programs shape how your prism bends light, which in turn affects what spectrum of truth you are even capable of perceiving. This is why two people can witness the same event and walk away with radically different truths. It's not about what happened, it's about how the light passed through them. And so the hue-man journey is not about learning more facts. It is about clearing the lens, correcting the angle, and restoring conscious control over how you refract. Experience, you do this not by denial, but by awareness. You become the observer who observes not only the world, but the one seeing it. Every emotional reaction becomes a diagnostic. Every repeated pattern becomes a clue. Every synchronicity becomes a light code, offering guidance not through content, but through frequency match. One of the most misunderstood elements of this truth is the difference between color and light. Light, in its purest form, is invisible white, unified, unbroken. But as it bends through density, it separates into colors. Each color carries its own symbolic weight, its own message. Red may call you into action. Blue may soften you into stillness. Green may invite healing. You are not bound to a single color. You are the full spectrum. And when you live from human awareness, you begin to shift into the color needed by the moment, like a sacred chameleon, not as a mask, but as a master. This is also why control of your environment matters. Because just as light entering a prism determines the hue, the information, people, and energy you surround yourself with directly impact your field. The media you consume, the words you speak, the tone you allow into your inner world. It is light, some of it coherent, some of it disruptive, but none of it neutral. You are always refracting something. And yet this realization is not meant to make you paranoid. It is meant to return your power. Because once you remember that you are human, you stop being a victim of light. You become a curator of it. You choose your angles, you adjust your lens, you clean your prism daily through presence, breath, sound, silence. The journey becomes one of continual attunement. The final core concept is this: you are not here to avoid darkness. You are here to understand how light behaves within it. The true human is not afraid of shadow. Shadow is not the absence of light. It is light refracted at extreme angles. The key is to observe what angle created it. What lens bent the beam so harshly that it fractured into fear, guilt, or illusion? When you trace it back to the source, you don't just transmute. The same light that once distorted now becomes the light you wield. And that is what it means to control the light angle. Stories, unlike definitions, have the power to enter the mind sideways, like light itself, bending at an unexpected angle, bypassing resistance and striking the heart. Where facts divide, symbols unite. And so if we are to grasp the deeper layers of what it means to be human, what it means to control the angle of light, we must allow ourselves to step beyond explanation, and instead inhabit the myth. Imagine a child born beneath two suns, not literally perhaps, but in soul. One sun warms their skin and grows their body. The other sun shines within the eternal flame of knowing, the soul light that existed before incarnation. As the child grows, their outer eyes fixate on the first sun, the one seen by all, while the inner sun dims beneath the weight of distraction and distortion. Their world teaches them names, rules, and limits. They learn that light is something they must seek rather than something they are. They are told to stay within the safe colors of convention, to fear the intensity of red, to distrust the silence of violet, to avoid the gold of self-sovereignty. Slowly, their hue narrows, their spectrum fades. One day, the child now grown catches their reflection in a pool of water at dusk. The surface ripples. For the briefest moment, their face fractures into a prism of color. Their eyes flash with unfamiliar brightness. It lasts only a second, but it's enough. Something awakens. They begin to dream in color. They begin to notice the way light enters a room, or how certain sounds make their body feel more translucent. They sense, perhaps for the first time, that they were never meant to be whole in the way they thought, but rather holy in the way they had forgotten. This is the first contact with human awareness. In another story, there is a being called the Light Shaper, not a god, not a prophet, but something older. The Light Shaper travels between worlds, not through distance, but through density, bending light differently in each plane, shaping perception as it goes. To those in darkness, it appears as a torch. To those in confusion, it appears as clarity. But to those ready to remember, it appears not as a savior, but as a mirror. The Light Shaper does not speak in words, diffracts. Its very presence invites beings to see themselves from new angles. Some weep, some resist, some shatter only, to discover that they were made of light all along, and what shattered was never their essence, but only the casing of compression. Light Shaper teaches a single lesson, that no one can give you light. You must learn to bend it. Then there is the myth of the Prism Keepers, a forgotten lineage that once tended to the frequency of civilizations. They did not rule, they tuned. They understood that when the inner angles of a people became distorted, when fear, hierarchy, and dissonance crept in the collective prism, fractured, wars broke out. Truth turned into dogma. Colors disappeared from culture, replaced with gray systems of control. So the Prism Keepers worked in silence. They restored angles through architecture, through music, through sacred geometry hidden in temples and city grids. They didn't preach, they bent light through symbols. And those with inner vision felt the shifts. The hue returned. In these stories, the recurring theme is not the presence of light, but the intentional interaction with it. Light without awareness becomes blinding. It becomes spiritual ego, or bypass, or false certainty. But light guided through the prism of humility and self-inquiry becomes wisdom, compassion, and coherence. This is the symbolic heart of controlling the light angle. It is not about domination, but about precision, not power, but presence. Consider the symbol of the stained glass window. In darkness, it is meaningless. But when light enters it, at the right angle, the whole space fills with color. The images emerge. The sacred is revealed. Yet the window itself doesn't create the light. It only receives it correctly. You are such a window. Your beliefs are the glass, your traumas, the cracks, your healed truths, the colors, and the divine light always there waits for you to align your pain so it can finally shine through. In full dot, and then there is the allegory of the colorless world, a place where everyone sees in black and white, and the very idea of color has been erased. In this world, there are still artists, but their palettes are gray. There are still prophets, but their visions are monochrome. Until one child is born who sees red, at first they are called mad, then dangerous, then divine. Their gift is not to impose color, but to remind others how to see it. Slowly, others begin to remember. Blue returns, then green, then gold. But the child says nothing. They only adjust their angle toward the inner sun, and the world follows. You are that child, or the light shaper, or the prism keeper, or perhaps all of them. You are not human. You are human. Not a shadow reacting to external conditions, but a conscious refraction of infinite light, sculpting the angle of your perception moment by moment. Not a body receiving orders, but a prism bending frequencies into form. And your life is not a series of random events, but a spectrum, a sacred unfolding of light, coded to awaken through contrast, through reflection, through hue. The stories are not just stories, they are blueprints. And the more you see yourself within them, the more your own myth begins to activate. In the metaphysical hush of awakening, after the myth has stirred your spirit, and the symbols have opened secret doors in your perception, comes the most sacred part of the journey: integration. It is one thing to glimpse the truth of being human, feel it in a flash of clarity, or to taste its resonance in silence, but another entirely to live from it, to shape your reality according to its light. Living as a human is not about transcending the physical world. It is about transforming your relationship with it. The mundane does not disappear, it becomes mythic. What once seemed dull or ordinary begins to shimmer with encoded meaning. You start noticing how the world mirrors your internal hue. Your emotions color your conversations, how your beliefs bend the outcomes of events, how even your posture can alter the angle of the light you carry. This is not imagination. This is energetic architecture made visible. Start, for instance, with space. The environment around you is your external prism. Every object, every color, every sound within it plays a role in how you bend the incoming light of experience. Clutter creates distortion. Sacred arrangement invites coherence. The human sees their space as an extension of their field, not something to control neurotically, but to attune consciously where light falls matters. The angle of your windows, the placement of mirrors, the direction you face while you write, meditate, or rest, these are not trivial. You only need to become a curator of your angles. Then comes language. Words, too, are frequencies. Each one carries a shade, a resonance. When you speak, you emit vibrations into the prism of shared reality. Negative self-talk doesn't just harm your confidence, it muddies your inner glass. Gratitude, not as a performance, but as an energetic reset, shifts the entire hue of your day. Speak not to fill silence, but to sculpt it. Let each word pass through the filter of alignment. Does this amplify light, or bend it away? You will also notice shifts in your social prism. It isn't about judgment, it's about resonance. Certain people dim your hue simply by the angle at which they view youth through old stories, projections, or fear. Others will amplify your light, not by praising you, but by seeing you clearly without distortion. The human does not cling to relationships out of habit. They calibrate constantly, adjusting the angles of interaction so that mutual light may pass freely, not as rejection, but as refinement. This leads to emotion, the raw frequency you emit most frequently. Emotions are not obstacles, they are data. Fear, for example, often signals that your perception is narrowing, becoming too sharp, too singular. Shame tells you your light is being bent back upon itself, distorting your natural expression. Anger is a flare of unintegrated energy, a frequency denied alignment. You begin to honor these not as problems, but as precise feedback systems. You become its translator. This conscious perception extends even to time. The HUE-MAN no longer relates to time as a rigid sequence. Synchronicities occur not because the universe is random, but because your light field is calibrated to draw in resonance. You become a magnet, not just for good things, but for soul-coded events. This is not magic, it is electromagnetic coherence. Technology, too, transforms. Your phone is no longer a device, but a mirror. The content that appears reflects your internal bandwidth. Notice what shows up when you're in dissonance versus when you're in clarity. Even digital light is still light. You can shift the algorithm of your external world by adjusting the algorithm of your inner prism. Clean it with silence, recalibrate it with stillness. Morning becomes not just the start of a day, but a chance to reset your hue. Rise with the sun if you can. Let the angle of that first light hit your skin, your eyes, your pineal gate. Drink water with awareness it carries light codes. Move your body not just for health, but for harmonic flow. Let each step be an act of alignment, not obligation. Art, music, breath. These are no longer hobbies, they are tools. Sound heals your prism. Movement adjusts your inner lens. Silence clears your angles. You become your own prism keeper, not once a week, but with each breath, each choice. Not as personalities or roles, but as spectrums. You begin to align in their presence, and sometimes, just by standing at the correct angle, emotionally, energetically, you refract a light they had forgotten. Living as a HUE-MAN is not about perfection. It is about precision. It is not about detachment from life, but deep engagement with it as a luminous, bending, breathing act of conscious refraction. You have always carried the light. Even when buried beneath labels, pain, confusion, or forgetfulness, it remained quiet, patient, timeless. It pulsed in the background of your awareness, waiting for the day you would no longer look outside for permission to see it, but would instead turn inward and remember, I am the prism. I am the angle. I am the light dot. To realize you are not merely human, but human, is to step across a threshold that cannot be easily reversed. Once seen, the spectrum cannot be unseen. You may still have days of shadow, moments where distortion clouds your lens, or old stories try to reclaim their grip, but you are no longer unconscious. You now know how to shift the angle. You now know where the light enters and how to guide it, not in theory, but in practice. This is the work of the new era, not to ascend and leave the body, but to descend fully into presence, to bring the light into form, to become a living, breathing, walking rainbow of awareness. The HUE-MAN does not reject the world. The HUE-MAN recolors it. They move through space like a tuning fork, aligning rooms, people, and energy, not by effort, but by field. They don't force truth, they become clear enough for truth, to move through them unbent. This clarity isn't found in more information, more credentials, more outside validation. It is cultivated in the silence between thoughts, in the way you breathe when no one is watching, in the quiet decisions to realign your posture, your words, your lens. It is revealed in how you pause instead of react, how you listen to frequencies instead of just words, how you begin to sense that every room, every encounter is a chamber of mirrors reflecting the hue of your own light back to you. You begin to live in reverent curiosity. What hue am I radiating right now? What angle of light am I standing in? What angle am I offering others? You begin to see beyond appearances. You witness how entire systems bend collective light into narrow, flattened truth sand. You gently, powerfully reintroduce color. To rebel, but to remember. Not to convince, but to calibrate. This is a spiritual act, a sovereign act, an act of cosmic reclamation. Because to live as a HUE-MAN is to live as a multidimensional artist, sculpting light with the tools of thought, emotion, breath, and form. And this art cannot be outsourced. No one can bend your prism for you. No one can find your angle. But youth, through attention, through healing, through sacred defiance, can shift everything. The systems that trained you to forget will not applaud your remembering. They are built on grayscale logic. They depend on the suppression of spectrum. But your very existence becomes rebellion. Not loud, not brash luminous. You change the field by being the field. You remind others not through argument, but through coherence, through the subtle shimmer of someone living in hue. And so, the call is not to abandon the old, but to infuse it. To walk through your day not as a program, but as a prism. To meet your relationships, your work, your thoughts not with resistance, but with radiant recalibration. The more you tune your angle, the more the world begins to shift around you. As if reality were waiting for you to remember how it was built in the first place. Because it was, you were never just here to survive light. You were here to sculpt it, to bring angles into alignment with the source, to let color move through your presence until the entire field begins to awaken. And yes, there will be days when the hue dims, when the light feels distant, when you forget. But even that forgetting is part of the spectrum. Even shadow has something to teach you about angle. And even when it seems you've lost the light, it is still moving through you, waiting for your prism to turn once more. So now, with this remembrance fully activated, you stand at a sacred threshold. Behind you, the myth of limitation. Before you, the reality of living light. The question is no longer if you are human. The question is, will you live like one? Will you walk through this world as a sovereign spectrum, aware, intentional, luminous? Will you clean your inner lens daily and choose your angles carefully? Will you carry your hue not as a burden but as a beacon? Because this is what the world needs now. Not more knowledge, not more noise, but more living prisms, more awakened angles, more beings of spectrum. This is your invitation. This is your remembering. This is your return. You are not human. You are human. Now control the light angle and become the color the world has forgotten.